So I was listening to a podcast earlier. An author I'm familiar with, read all his books. His name is Bill Plotkin. Has done a lot on the human soul, nature and the human soul. Psychologist, not entirely sure all of his background, um, but has very much been nature oriented. And his work's great. I love his work. It's taught me a lot about myself, a lot about finding one's deeper purpose in this crazy world of ours. And they were talking, as most of his writing is, about soul. How do you move to these deeper recesses of ourselves to begin to explore our place in this world? And I think the one thing to be mindful of when it comes to soul work is it is not limited in the way that we limit so many other things. That it is not limited to something that is only concentrated within humans. This understanding of soul is something much bigger and yet so much a part of our internal life that it goes beyond, it goes into the natural world. That's his point as well, that it isn't just limited to this human understanding. And if you do limit it to that human understanding, it's probably not soul. More than likely, it's much more about your ego at that point. We don't have a lot of processes, and there aren't it's even difficult to find people that can help us move to those deeper recesses of ourselves. I have found it often comes in the form of metaphor more than anything, which my background has helped tremendously in. And I had happened to work with a woman up in Sedona last summer, I think it was, who took me around to different areas, and we spent a half a day together for 3 days, exploring this idea of soul in relation to nature, in relation to Sedona. If you haven't been to Sedona, it's just a remarkable place out here in Arizona. And to find that connection, that this connection goes much deeper than just human connection. Finding our place in the world isn't about finding the right job. It's not about finding the right career. It's really about finding ourselves in relation to the larger natural world in which we are a part of. We're not separate from. Again, it's another one of those things. If I'm separating myself from the rest, it's driven more by ego than it is about making whole. Soul is very much about making whole. But when I was up there, when I was up in Sedona and working with her each day on this topic, this idea of pulling a thread was central. It has stuck with me. It's 13 months now, I think, since I was there, and still has stuck with me. This idea of being able to pull a thread, pull a thread, pull a thread. That this deeper understanding isn't going to come by finding answers and or anything along those lines, logic. It's going to be in this image. As I said, it's much more about metaphor than it is logic. And it's not even only this image for me was not only just about like yanking a thread. If you could imagine the delicacy of threads intertwined with one another and gradually pulling that so that it doesn't just crumble and fall apart, which I think is the fear a lot of people have about doing internal work, about exploring their internal world. But it's more this gradual unfolding, this gradual pull, that if I continue to pull on this thread, not that's pulling in my own life, but that's also assisting others in pulling that thread in their life. That this idea of soul will eventually begin to formulate in some ways. It also is not a one-time deal, like which is why the metaphor is so helpful and transcends time, because I can look at that metaphor now and I can look at that metaphor 10 years from now and can have very different meaning to it based on where I'm at. But it's still going to pull me back to this image of pulling that thread, of untangling, because so much gets tangled up in our life that we don't what is logic, what is my head, what is my critical voice, what are all these things? it's hard to discern all those pieces when it's tangled. And so as she worked with me, this was the image that came to mind for her when as she worked with me, that in some sense you're the untangler of that thread. Again, I face it within my own life, and am very good at dealing with chaos out in the world because I can pull those pieces apart and then pull back together what is necessary, kind of bring a sense of order. For me, my own background, it consistently takes me back to the beginning of the Bible of out of chaos comes order, and I think in many ways that's if I had to pick one passage, like that is the one that has been central for me. Out of chaos comes order. Go into this place. Here's the chaos. How do we bring order to that? And that's all in that untangling of that thread. But that's me. That's in some sense my metaphor, and maybe that metaphor works for you as well. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's your sole purpose. It doesn't necessarily mean that is coming from that deeper place within yourself. And so Bill Plotkin's work has been tremendous at helping me explore these deeper recesses of my own heart, my own soul, and just layer after layer after layer after layer of life that has been built upon that it's hard to hear that voice. It's hard to hear that deeper voice of intuition, deeper voice of my true self, whatever language you want to use to describe that place. It requires this untangling and removing of the layers gradually. And some have experienced that. I've been there as well. The experience where everything just kind of falls apart at the same time. And that's one way of it happening. And sometimes something tragic, something that we weren't expecting, has a way of knocking us off of our feet that way. But can I go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper to find that sole purpose of what your place is in the world? Not limited to the human world, but to this larger world in which we share. Much more of an eco perspective than an ego perspective is the language that Bill uses. I don't know how we do that with young people, because all of us have been conditioned to, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life? What's your job? What's your occupation? And sometimes, and I've been there, they are soul-sucking activities in our lives. But they can also give hints as to what that soul is calling us forth. It might not be that career, it might not be that job, but there are pieces of it that we're attracted to in one way or another that then can give us the beginning of the pulling of that thread to go deeper to find what that real purpose and place is. And we spend a lot of time in our younger years trying to fit in and meet expectations and worry about how we're going to be perceived in one way or another. And it often leads us further disconnected and further lonely. But this work of soul work, of this deeper idea of who we are, which it's good to keep in mind that it's also bigger than any type of religious understanding of what soul is. That this work is much more about belonging. It's not about fitting in. It is about being okay and comfortable in your own skin and in who you are, and not worry about all these other pieces that we have made so central to our lives. And they're all pieces that are beyond us and are out of our control in the first place. And so this soul work, can we untangle all these pieces and begin to explore, where do I belong? Where do I belong might be a better question than fitting in, or what's your job and what career path are you taking? Where do you belong? Where do you belong in this world? What's speaking to you at this moment? How is the natural world around you speaking to you at this moment? All of those are clues to something much deeper than logic, much deeper than career choice, job, anything like that. That's the meat of it. That's the heart of what we're really looking for. Literally the heart of what we are looking for about ourselves, so that our lives don't have to be about fitting in. They can be much more about belonging in a world that has a space for us. What is that space and how do we belong in that space is up to us. That's the hard work. That's the work of soul. That's the work of our own internal work. The work can be hard, but what flows from that will give us life. It will give us fulfillment. It will give us meaning. It will give us purpose. And best of all, it allows us to be in this world and to know that we belong. Regardless of anything else, we belong.